Have you ever seen a woman use her body like a weapon? I have. I painted her lips the color of spilled wine, watched men kneel for her smile, then die from her silence. She ruled with whispers and thighs, with velvet and blood, with one hand on the Bible and the other between her legs. They called her Catherine the Great, but I knew her before the title, before the beasts, before the empire bled for her pleasure. She let me watch, she let me paint, and now she lets me confess.
They called her a foreign girl, too thin, too clever, too quiet. She arrived in Russia with frost on her lashes and ambition in her spine. Her real name was Sophie. But that name vanished the moment her boots touched Russian soil. I saw her for the first time through a keyhole. 14, German, eyes like wet steel, and already watching the world as if it were hers to bend. She wasn't supposed to matter. She was a diplomatic pawn, a bride for a half-mad heir with bad teeth and a mind full of tin soldiers. No one expected her to survive the week. But she smiled and curtsied and bled quietly through her slippers every night, learning Russian by whispering it to herself in the dark. Every word was a weapon. She sharpened them with her tongue. At court, she played the perfect girl, modest, obedient, all soft wrists and lowered lashes. But I was already painting her. Not on canvas, in my mind, frame by frame. A girl in silk, a girl holding daggers behind her smile, a girl who waited. Then came the fever. Winter 1744, the kind of sickness that licked at lungs and cracked open bones. She nearly died. Her fiancé, the Grand Duke, never visited. He sent a priest and forgot her name. But Catherine, she didn't curse. She didn't cry. She called for a mirror, made me bring it. I held it up and she stared at her own reflection like it was a challenge. Cheeks hollow, eyes ringed in black, a girl drowning from the inside out. She whispered, "I won't die in this body," then bit her lip until it bled. To be Empress, I'll kill every part of me that's weak. She survived, and when she walked again, she walked like someone who had tasted death and found it bland. They dressed her in Russian silk, painted her lips redder than fed her the stories of saints and czars like poison disguised as prayer, but nothing softened her spine. Nothing dimmed that look, the one that studied everyone like she already knew where to press to make them shatter. One night I brought her sketches, formal portraits as requested. She barely looked. Instead, she poured wine and asked me, "What color do you think ambition is?" I said silver. She shook her head. "No," she whispered, "it's bone, the color of what's left when the heat's burned everything else away." That was the first time she touched me, fingers on my wrist, just once. No flirtation, no warmth, just the weight of future history pressing into my pulse. She began collecting secrets, not lovers, not yet, information. She memorized which chambermaid belonged to which faction, which guard twitched when he lied, which advisor's hands shook around the Empress. She asked questions no 16-year-old should know how to ask, about treaties, succession, war, about bloodlines. She didn't speak of love, not once. And then, the wedding. A spectacle, a trap. They wed her to a boy thing who giggled at corpses and slept with his toy grenadiers. He smelled of vinegar and cowardice, but she kissed him anyway, in front of the court, with eyes open. And when the guests applauded, she looked directly at me and smiled. Later that night, I passed her in the corridor. She didn't stop, didn't speak, but as she moved past, her fingers brushed mine, still wet with ink. She had written something. Just one word. On the inside of her sleeve. It read, "Soon." She wasn't Empress yet. But I've never seen anyone so certain that she already ruled.
The palace smelled of damp stone and betrayal. Not all at once, just enough to make the tapestries feel heavier and the eyes watching from behind them seem closer. They say court life is a dance, but no one told Catherine the music would be played with knives. Peter hated her. That part was clear. He hated her grace, her intellect, her way of making silence feel like accusation. She tried to please him once, learned his language, laughed at his cruel jokes, even knelt beside his toy soldiers as he reenacted Prussian victories with spittle on his chin. But he didn't want a wife. He wanted a mirror, one that flattered his cowardice and reflected his power. And Catherine? Catherine was made of steel, not glass. The first plot came from within the linens. A chambermaid, sweet-faced, with hands too soft for real labor, was caught rifling through Catherine's personal papers. A coded letter, a report. Nothing conclusive, but enough for the Empress herself to take notice. They didn't punish the girl. They removed Catherine's attendants instead, replaced them with watchers, listeners, women whose eyes never blinked at the same time. Peter started locking his door at night, not out of fear of intruders, but of her. He accused her of witchcraft, of seducing guards with just a glance, of poisoning his soup with thoughts alone. He told the court she slept with books under her pillow, that her womb would be cursed with ideas instead of sons. And the court laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was safer than silence. Catherine began sleeping during the day. At night, she read, wrote, waited. She stopped painting her lips, stopped smiling in court. Instead, she studied power, how it flowed, where it pooled, who really held it and who only thought they did. That's when she found Orloff. Not in the way people whisper about now, not yet. He was just a shadow in a hallway, a soldier who stood too still and didn't flinch when others lied. She asked for his name. He didn't give it. He just said, "I'm not loyal to men, I'm loyal to cause." And Catherine, she didn't need more lovers, she needed believers. The Empress grew ill, or pretended to. No one knew for sure, but during that strange fog, Peter gained courage, or delusion. He paraded through the corridors in Prussian uniform, declared plans to dissolve the Senate, and muttered openly about sending Catherine to a convent, or worse. Some say he already had her cell prepared. Straw mattress, no oak, no mirrors. One night I found Catherine in the East Wing, alone, barefoot, her hair unbound, no guards, no pretense. She looked like a saint abandoned by her church, or a queen in the moment before the crown touches her head. She said, "I dreamed of fire." I asked, "A warning?" She shook her head. No, a map. That same week, the second plot surfaced. A nobleman, close to the emperor's inner circle, was found dead, face down in the reflecting pool. No wounds, no blood, just lilies in his mouth, and a single word carved into his chest, shallow but deliberate. She. Peter blamed her. Of course he did. Tried to have her confined, tried to break into her chambers while drunk and shouting scripture. But he couldn't touch her. Not yet. The Empress was still alive. And Catherine had learned which ministers drank too much, which guards owed debts, which priests whispered in Latin but counted in rubles. In those days she barely ate, barely blinked. She was hunger sharpened, not for food, for control. She kissed no one, held no one, not even Orlov. She built her power like a tower, stone by stone, lie by lie, secret by secret. And when it was ready, she'd burn it all down, just to be the only one left standing in the smoke. She still let me draw her. Late nights, no candles, just chalk and silence. She'd sit nude wrapped in fur,
her body pale against the bear pelt. Not sensual, not fragile, just real, like a woman sculpted by frost and will alone. She asked me once, "Do you think people are born cruel, or does power make them interesting?" I said, "Maybe both." She nodded and smiled, without her mouth. I was sent to paint walls. That was all they told me. A fresh mural in the southern wing of Oranienbaum Palace. A quiet commission. A cold corridor. Nothing more. But they never said who lived in the chamber above. They never said her name. At that time, she was still just Sophie. No empress, no throne, no empire. Only the Prussian girl with too many books and too few visitors. Wife of the heir, mother of no one yet, half forgotten in a palace built like a cage. And I was a ghost with brushes, tucked into corners, watching the firelight climb her window. She passed me once, didn't look at me, only paused, turned her chin ever so slightly, as if she had smelled something unfamiliar. Then she vanished, but not entirely. Later that week, a letter came. No name, no seal, only a request. Come after dusk, bring charcoal. I obeyed. What else could I do? The room was dark when I entered, warmer than I expected. Curtains drawn, fire low. She didn't stand to greet me. She sat at a small writing table, ink smudged on her fingers, something half written in German before her. "Draw me," she said. I thought she meant a portrait, but she didn't turn to face me. Instead, she slid off her gloves, slowly, like a woman unwrapping a memory. She said nothing more. So I drew. Her silhouette, her stillness, the soft curve of her wrist where candlelight met skin. Nothing indecent, nothing forbidden. Not yet. That night became many nights, always after dusk, always without a name. She never posed. She suggested. Sometimes she read aloud Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, then fell quiet halfway through a line, waiting to see if I would continue it for her. I did. Not because I understood every word, but because I understood her voice. She never touched me, never flirted, but her presence filled the room like heat, like something slow and liquid dripping into all the wrong places. She asked questions, sharp ones. What do men fear most in a woman? What does a brush do better than a sword? And once, eyes glinting above the rim of her glass, if power had a scent, what would it be? I didn't know how to answer. I still don't. But I kept coming back. Not for money, not for art, but because I was beginning to see something I hadn't known how to see before. She wasn't just learning how to rule. She was learning how to pull. Not with orders, with gravity, with precision. One day she showed me something. A small canvas, rough and unfinished. A woman cloaked in gold, her face obscured, standing before a mirror. Behind her, shadows, men kneeling, the crown melting in fire. "You think it's me," she said. "It is," I said. She smiled and said, "Not yet." Then she told me about Peter, about the cold silences, the way he laughed too loudly when others flattered him, how he feared his own ministers, how he recoiled when she tried to discuss reforms, even the ones from his beloved Prussia. She said, "He drinks with soldiers and plays with puppets, while I write letters to Paris." She didn't say it with contempt. She said it like a problem to be solved. That was the scariest part.
There was no bitterness in her voice, only curiosity. I began to understand. This wasn't about love or lust. This was experimentation. She was observing, testing, not just me, everyone, and herself. She read people like instruments, tuning them, studying how they bent under pressure, how far they could stretch before they snapped. And she was patient, patient enough to pretend she wasn't. She once said to me, almost in passing, "To rule a country, you must first learn to rule silence." I didn't know what she meant until she leaned back in her chair, sipped from her glass, and said nothing at all for 5 full minutes. I squirmed. She didn't. She was training me, training everyone, even herself. And the part that terrified me most, I wanted to be trained. I wanted her to look at me the way she looked at a chessboard, not with desire, but with strategy. I wanted to be useful, beautiful, breakable. She never touched me, but I left her room each night with shaking hands and a heart full of noise. Something was happening, something I didn't have a name for. Not until the night she asked me to stay after the last candle had gone out. "Lie down," she said. "I won't touch you. I only want to listen to your breath." And she did, for hours, listening to me breathe. I think I fell asleep, and when I woke up, she was gone. But on the table, beside my brushes, was a note. No signature, just a line. "You draw well, but soon I will need you to see."
She didn't take the crown. She seduced it. No trumpet announced her rise. No sword was drawn in her name. And yet, when I stepped into her chambers the morning after Peter's fall, the world already called her Empress. It was July 1762. The coup had lasted just 6 days. Bloodless, they whispered. But I had painted enough faces to know power always leaves a bruise. Peter III was gone. Dead, they said, from hemorrhoidal colic, a charming euphemism for a strangled Tsar. She never spoke his name again. Instead, she called me into her private atelier, not as a servant, not as a witness, but as a participant. The door closed, the room bathed in red velvet and the musk of roses, and there she stood, no longer the consort, no longer the foreign bride, but something else. Catherine, the sovereign flesh. "Paint me," she said, "as you've never painted a man." And then she laughed, not cruelly, but like a girl drunk on stolen wine. I had painted kings nude, queens half-draped, lovers caught in candlelight, but never an empress, newly crowned, newly dangerous, stretching across silk sheets with one breast bare and a dagger still wet with the morning. Her eyes weren't cold, they burned. That day, she told me things a ruler should never admit, not to God, not to a mirror, certainly not to a man with a brush. She spoke of the moment Peter fell, how the guards didn't need persuading, how the people called her Mother Russia before her robes were even tailored. She described her enemies, Panin, Orlov, the Senate men with powdered wigs and powdered courage, men who had underestimated her and were now licking her boots. She didn't rule with mercy. She ruled with desire, because fear fades, but seduction,
Seduction leaves chains you thank your captor for. Later that evening, I watched her dine with ambassadors, still in that same ruby dress, still with a smear of my charcoal on her neck. She discussed taxes, military reform, the import of French lace. But beneath the lace, the silk, the policy was animal. Catherine didn't hide her appetite. She wielded it. One ambassador, Prussian if I recall, offered her a jeweled snuff box. She opened it, smiled, then turned to me and said, "Would you paint me eating him alive?" The room fell silent, and then she laughed again, but I saw it in her pupils. She wasn't joking. I returned to the atelier the next day, the canvas still damp, my fingers still stained with her lips. But she had changed. Now her gown was darker, her crown heavier. She had signed her first edict, a reshuffling of the Senate, a quiet threat to those who thought her reign would be gentle. She posed with a scepter in one hand and a leash in the other. No dog at the end, just an empty collar. That was her genius. She didn't need to show her beasts, only remind you that they existed. The Russian court began to transform. Men once proud grew quiet, women once invisible grew bold. Loyalty became currency, and Catherine, she minted it like gold. She asked me to paint a mural, a grand ceiling piece for the Winter Palace. Venus triumphs over Mars. But I changed it without her permission. I made Venus her, and Mars was not a god. He was a boy, bare-chested, tied to the bedpost of Olympus. When she saw it, she didn't blink, just smiled and said, "You understand me better than my generals." The truth is, I didn't. I wanted to, but Catherine was never just one thing. She was crown and claw, silk and blood, a mother to the empire, and a mistress to its demons. Some say that's what made her dangerous, but no. What made her dangerous was how easy it was to love her. Even as she rewrote laws, banished priests, invited philosophers to her bed and exiled their critics. Even as Peter's body cooled, unburied in a cellar, and she sang lullabies to his memory. We painted her as Minerva. We called her enlightened. But I remember her best not as a goddess, but as a woman in shadow, pressing her lips to a letter from Voltaire and whispering, "He'll never know how much I hate his questions." Because Catherine didn't want to be understood. She wanted to be obeyed. And I was already hers.
I used to think treason was an action, a blade, a poisoned letter, a toast with too much sweetness. I was wrong. Treason has a scent. It begins where no one suspects, in a silver teacup, in the scented edge of a letter, and the soft rustle of silk when Catherine sat across from Peter and did not smile. That spring night I stood behind a velvet curtain, ink still on my fingers, eyes fixed on the pale line of her throat. She didn't look at Peter. She glanced at Orlov, her new lover, her new beast, and her future executioner. Peter was no longer an emperor. He was a joke in a Prussian uniform. After signing peace with Frederick the Great, a humiliation to Russian pride, he strutted through the palace like a lost actor. He ordered German marches, forced the maids to speak German, and tried to replace Orthodox icons with cold Teutonic symbols. Russia winced. Catherine smiled. And I began to paint her, not as the woman in my bed, but as the strategist over a map soaked in blood. The conspiracy began with wordless meals. Catherine invited officers to tea.
No wine, no women, no music. Just innocent questions. What if a mother defends Russia better than a king? Would a child need a father if his mother ruled with strength? I was ordered to paint them, one by one. Not for beauty, but for leverage. She studied every weakness. Who was greedy, who was lustful, who feared death, who owed her everything. Orlov was different. He didn't need to be painted. He came every night, smelling of gunpowder, vodka, and violence. I heard him through her door. Not love, not pleasure, but taming. She wanted a dog, a loyal beast who would tear out a king's throat on command. The night of the coup was quiet. No thunder, only Tathrin's heels echoing through the corridor. I followed her, paint box in hand. No one questioned me, because when she walked, even darkness parted. Orlov waited by the stables, handing her a sword, not gilded, not decorated, raw steel, real blood. She didn't flinch, just pulled her cloak tighter, revealing a thin armor beneath her white silk. Then she turned to me, and for the first time since I met her, her eyes held no lust, only command. Peter was captured in his sleep. He begged to be sent to Germany. Catherine wasn't there. They locked him away in Rapsha. A week later, he fell and died. I didn't ask. She didn't explain. We met again in the studio. I was finishing her coronation portrait. I painted her hand gripping the golden orb, and a faint red trail bleeding from her wrist. Only she and I knew what it meant. Treason has no sound, only an aftertaste. And on the day she was crowned, with the crowd roaring in the rain, I stood above, watching her soaked hair, her wet skin, her power dripping like wine. She turned toward me. No smile, no seduction, just a question in her eyes. Do you still dare to love me now that I've killed my husband? I didn't answer, just nodded, because I knew she would kill more.
Some queens craved diamonds. Catherine craved obedience. She didn't want adoration. She wanted submission. Bodies that bent, broke, bled, and never questioned her crown. After the coup, after Peter's blood had dried in a forgotten cell, she was unstoppable. Not just as a ruler, but as something more. Not quite a woman, not quite divine. Something carved out of ice, silk, and sin. They say she kept a secret chamber. They didn't lie. I was summoned there once, not as an artist, but as a witness. The walls were red velvet. The light came from above, soft, golden, like candlelight in a church. But there was no altar, only a chair, tall-backed, carved with lions. She sat in it like a goddess awaiting sacrifice. He entered naked, save for a chain. Not Orlov, not this time. Younger, stronger, terrified. She asked no questions, only looked, then pointed. I had to paint it. Every line, every mark, every moment of surrender. The boy knelt, kissed her boots. She placed her foot on his neck. The silence was unbearable, like waiting for a storm to tear the roof off the palace. She whispered his name, a name I never dared write down, and he collapsed in tears. She had broken him. Without a lash, without a scream, only a gaze, a word, a fingertip. Later, she turned to me, still half-clothed, skin gleaming with sweat and power. She asked,
"What do you see?" I answered truthfully, "A woman who doesn't need a sword to conquer." She smiled. "No, painter. What you see is Russia." From that night on, her rituals grew stranger. One week, it was dancers, silent, oiled, masked. The next, it was soldiers made to crawl and chant. There was a rhythm to it, a pulse, as if her lust was no longer for pleasure, but for something older, control, dominance, a hunger the throne couldn't feed. And I kept painting, not for gold, not even for favor, but because I was addicted to her, to the way her shadows moved, to the way she devoured men with a whisper, to the silence after her pleasure, the silence thick with secrets. They called her Empress, but in that chamber, she was high priestess. And the empire, it was built not on law or faith, but on the trembling knees of those who worshipped her, flesh and soul.
She locked the doors herself that night. Not a servant in sight. Not even the hounds dared prowl the corridor outside. It was just her and me, and the canvas, blank, tall, cold, waiting to be devoured. "No flattery tonight," she said, her voice low, raw. "Paint me as I am." I asked what she meant. She said nothing, just turned and let the robe fall. Catherine stood before me not as an empress, not as a goddess of war, but as a woman who had forgotten what softness felt like. There were marks on her thighs, old ones, like whip scars. New ones, too. Thin, fresh, red as the wine she'd spilled on the floor. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. "Do you see it?" she whispered. "The rot!" I hesitated. Not from fear, but from awe. Because she was right. There was something wrong inside her. Something cracking, leaking out, pooling behind her eyes like smoke. I began with her hands, rings removed, fingers stiff, not of royalty, but of a butcher, someone who had held too much flesh, too many hearts. Then her shoulders, one higher than the other, tension pulled taut like rope, her breastbone bruised, her ribs sharp, no softness left, no mercy. She watched me paint, not as a muse, but like a prisoner watching her own execution. "I killed him, you know." Her voice barely a breath. "Peter?" I asked. She nodded. "With my silence." Then she laughed, not cruelly, but like a woman confessing to a ghost. And now the silence won't leave. She approached the mirror in the corner, a tall, antique thing, warped by time, cracked in its silver. She stared at it, naked, pale, still gleaming with sweat, then whispered, "What do you see?" I didn't answer, not aloud, because what I saw, what the mirror showed that night, was not the woman I painted. It was something older, hungrier, eyes black as ink, a grin that didn't belong to any human mouth, flesh shifting, bleeding, changing. Catherine touched the glass. The reflection didn't follow. It just watched her, then mouthed something I couldn't hear. She didn't flinch. She nodded. The next morning, she gifted me a medal, silver, cold, stamped with her face, to remember who holds your soul. I never asked her what she meant, because deep down, I knew. The Catherine I painted that night, the one who stared into the mirror, she had never left the room, and the thing that walked out wasn't quite her anymore.
They never let the light shine on that part of the palace. Even the maids refused to clean the floors unless Catherine herself ordered it. That hallway, narrow, veiled in candle smoke and whispers, led to the room no noblewoman dared speak of after dark. They called it the mirror room. But to me, it was a chamber of reflections, not just of glass, but of flesh, of fear, and of the Empress's most dangerous hunger. It was summer of 1764, St. Petersburg baked beneath golden heat, the city rotted with perfume and sweat. The court had grown bored, a dangerous thing when power had too much time. That's when Catherine summoned him, a foreign emissary from Württemberg, barely 19, educated, brilliant, and utterly unaware of what it meant to enter the eyes of an empress who'd spent years sharpening her taste like a blade. His name doesn't matter now. No one speaks it, not even I. What matters is how she looked at him, like a wolf seeing a lamb that didn't know it had wandered. I had just finished sketching her portrait, one she refused to let the Senate see, when she turned to me and said, in that voice that always slid like velvet between the ribs, "Tonight, he sees himself." I knew what she meant, and where. She wore no crown that evening, just a robe of ink-black silk. Her hair was loose, falling like wet brush strokes down her back. I walked beside her in silence through that forbidden hallway. Behind us, the boy followed, half curious, half flattered. The mirror room greeted us like a confession. Its walls, lined entirely with tall Venetian glass, reflected not just your face, but every lie behind your smile. The candles never stood still there. They trembled, as if knowing too much. She motioned for me to stay, not to draw, no, not that night, but to witness. She liked me to see. I don't know why. Maybe because I never flinched. Or maybe because I loved her too much to stop her. The boy stood in the center, looking at a dozen versions of himself. Young, proud, golden. She circled him like smoke. "Tell me," she asked, brushing a finger against the mirror, "do you think power is given or taken?" He stammered. Some foolish line about diplomacy, treaties, usual boyish nonsense. She smiled and unfastened the robe. It fell with a sigh to the floor. 12 Catherines surrounded him now, naked, regal, terrifying. "Look at yourself," she whispered. "I see a man. I see a boy pretending. Do you want to become more?" He nodded, fool. And then she struck him. Not hard, not cruel, but enough to make his face flush with something primal. Embarrassment, arousal, shame. She tilted his chin toward the mirror. Again. This was her ritual. Not sex, not punishment, but transformation. She believed power came through surrender, and tonight she would make him crawl toward it. She didn't undress him. She made him do it, piece by piece, with every button a confession, every breath a surrender. The room filled with echoes of moans and mirrored groans, and I kept still. I shouldn't have stayed. I should have closed the door and walked away. But the truth? Part of me wanted to see the boy break. Part of me wanted to see her rise. He cried, eventually. They always did. Tears didn't stop her. They were part of it. The mirrors reflected every angle of his collapse, the way his spine curled under her hand, the way his pride crumbled when she whispered, "You're nothing yet, but you could be." She never touched him like a lover. She touched him like a sculptor, reshaping clay. By dawn, the mirror room was silent again. Just glass, sweat, and a crumpled figure on the floor. She didn't speak as we left. She didn't need to. That morning he left for Vienna. He never returned. Some say he joined a monastery. Others claim he slit his throat on the border. I believe he simply saw too much. Of her, of himself. Because once you've seen the truth reflected in 12 mirrors, you cannot go back to being ordinary. And Catherine? She returned to court that afternoon, radiant and calm. The Senate never knew. The church never asked. But the servants started avoiding the hallway again. Even the candles seemed dimmer. And me? I painted her again that week. A new portrait,
This time, not as a ruler, but as a goddess who had no need for thrones, only worship. She once told me that a falcon, if trained properly, will never forget its master, even when set free. We stood on the palace rooftop that morning. The sky was cracked with frost, bleeding the weak sunlight of a St. Petersburg winter. She held the hooded bird close to her chest, her breath fogging around the leather glove as if whispering secrets into the creature's feathers. "Do you know why I like falcons?" she asked, not turning to me. I gave no answer. I had learned by then that the Empress never truly asked questions. She simply invited you to listen. They strike from above, swift, precise, and when they kill, it's elegant. No screams, no mess, just one moment of flight, then silence. She ran a gloved finger down the falcon's curved beak, but even the wildest bird needs two things: hunger and discipline. That day was not about the falcon. That day was about Ivan Orlov, the youngest of the Orlov brothers, the most beautiful, and, some whispered, the most dangerous. While the others played soldier or schemed with ministers, Ivan danced. He seduced. He played violin with bloodied fingers and quoted Voltaire with vodka on his lips. He thought she loved him. He thought wrong. The night before, he had performed at a masked ball, half naked under a velvet cloak, painted in gold dust like a pagan idol. The Empress watched from behind a silk screen, laughing softly as he mimed love to every noblewoman in the room. But the mask, she said later, was not on his face. It was his soul. He had been writing letters to Vienna. Reckless, arrogant letters that praised the Austrian court, hinted at reforms Catherine hadn't authorized, suggested alliances she hadn't chosen. She didn't punish him that night. No. She waited. She waited until the rooftop was slick with morning ice, until the city below looked like a map of her empire, tiny, controllable, cold. Then she handed me the brush. "Paint him," she said, "as he kneels." He was already waiting. No guards, no chains. Just him, kneeling on one knee like a knight before the Empress, his breath steaming in the cold, his shirt half unbuttoned to expose the white of his chest. I had never painted outdoors in winter before. My fingers stiffened around the brush, but I obeyed. Behind me, she removed the hood of the falcon. The bird didn't move. Not yet. She circled Ivan slowly, like a dance, her fur cloak dragging across the stones, her boots silent. "You have beauty, but you use it like a dagger, not a gift. You charm others to betray me. You speak of freedom while wearing my jewels." He looked up at her. No fear. Only that maddening Orlov smile. "Majesty, if I betray you, it is only to teach you who you can truly trust." She slapped him. Once. The sound cracked the cold air like a whip. Then she raised her arm. The falcon launched. I watched as the bird circled once, twice, then dove. Not towards Ivan, but towards a painted wooden decoy placed beside him. A trick. A test. The falcon struck the false prey and returned to her glove, talons dripping red. But Ivan flinched. Just slightly. Just enough. That was all she needed. She leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Loyalty," she whispered, "is not in what you say. It's in what you do when no one's watching." She turned to me then, her voice calm. "Finish the painting and make him beautiful. I want history to remember this moment before he becomes irrelevant." Later that day, Ivan was sent to a remote outpost in Crimea. No trial, no scandal. Just an imperial order sealed in black wax. His name was struck from the court register, his violin was given to a visiting Prussian diplomat, his lover was reassigned as a stablemate. And the painting, that I kept. Even now I look at it. Ivan, on his knees, pale chest bared, a faint bruise on his cheek, and snow in his hair like powdered silver. He is not ashamed in the image. He is radiant, defiant. But I remember what she said as I handed it to her. Men like Ivan are useful until they begin to believe they're irreplaceable. That winter, she flew the Falcon every morning. She never named it. Perhaps because she didn't need to. It was loyal. It obeyed. It killed on command, just like she wanted her men. And just like the bird, I too remained at her glove, watching, painting, waiting for her next command.
She told me not to speak. Just sit there and look. The room was windowless. A heavy velvet curtain hung where the mirrors used to be. No gold, no candlelight, just a single lantern on the floor, casting shadows up her legs like vines climbing marble. I thought I had seen her bare before. I was wrong. This was not nudity. This was sovereignty, peeled back like skin. She stood in silence for a long time, no movement, except the faint shiver of silk falling to her ankles. Her body was a contradiction, curved like a courtesan's lie, but carved like a soldier's truth. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't hide her stomach or the faint stretch of birth across her hips. She showed me everything. Every scar, every hollow, every inch that the court called imperfect. "Paint this," she finally whispered. "Not the crown, not the throne, not the myth. Paint me." My fingers trembled, not from lust, not quite, from the weight of it. Because I knew this was not for posterity. This was not to seduce. This was to own me. She sat on the edge of the low platform, back straight, legs apart, like a statue of Mars brought to Earth. Her hands rested loosely on her knees. Her hair was pinned up, not for beauty, but for control. "Do you remember Maria?" she asked softly. The brush froze in my hand. Maria. The maid who had once braided her hair. The one who had disappeared after laughing too loudly at a joke Peter made. "She said I had the back of a man," Catherine murmured, her eyes closed now. "But I was thick, heavy." I said nothing. I wasn't supposed to. She tilted her head toward me then, one shoulder falling slightly. "What do you think?" The trap was elegant. Answer with flattery, and I become a coward. Answer with honesty, and I risk my place in her world. But I had already lost the choice. My pulse was painting without me. The line of her thigh, the tension in her stomach, the proud rise of her breasts that did not need approval. "I think," I said carefully, "you look like someone who survived a war with herself." She smiled. Small, cruel, pleased. "Good. Now paint that." So I did. I painted the woman who had bled and broken and clawed her way through 10 years of marriage to a fool. I painted the Empress who wore no jewels because she didn't need them. I painted the eyes that had watched ministers fall and lovers crawl and enemies disappear without leaving blood. But I also painted the shadows beneath her ribs, the faint tremble when she exhaled, the loneliness that clung to her like the smell of candle wax after midnight. When the brush stopped, I didn't realize how long it had been. The lantern had burned low. She stood, slowly, the spell breaking. She walked toward the canvas, naked, proud, unbothered by my gaze. And when she stood before her own image, I saw something flickered behind her eyes. Not pride, not satisfaction, but something like grief. Grief for what she used to be before power. Grief for the girl who braided her own hair. She touched the canvas just once,
her fingertip brushing the place where I had darkened the space beneath her collarbone. "That," she said, "is where he hit me." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to, because the silence that followed told me everything. She turned back to me, still naked, still in command. "Tomorrow, you will paint me clothed, dressed in armor, with fire behind me." I nodded, but I knew this moment, this undressing, was the real portrait. Not the one for the nobles, not the one for history, just the one she gave me. And whether it was love or punishment, it was mine to carry forever.
The armor wasn't real, not iron, not chainmail, not forged in any smithy. It was sewn, layer by layer, from silk, velvet, and smoke. A red cloak lined with sable, a corset laced so tight it silenced breath, a color high enough to slice a man's sightline like a blade. And beneath it all, just beneath, still the woman I had painted bare the night before. But she wouldn't speak of that now. The naked portrait was gone, vanished from the studio. Hidden? Burned? Hung above her bed? I never asked. I never would. Today, I was painting the lie. And she wanted it perfect. "Make me taller," she commanded, standing beneath the false firelight I'd rigged with amber glass. "Make my hands strong, like I hold the empire between my fingers." She did. She always had. But this time, it wasn't for herself. It was for them. The men waiting just outside, the foreign envoys, the generals with brittle egos, the bishops who still called her little German girl behind polished lips. She would show them power, not with words, but with image. And I would be her executioner. I painted her standing at the edge of battle, not bloodied, but unyielding. Behind her, flames rose in theatrical curls. Before her, shadows bent, like men who knelt. The symbolism was not subtle. That was the point. She watched every stroke. Her silence was not indifference, it was control. Then, just as I reached for the gold to crown her shoulder, she stopped me. "No!" She stepped forward and placed a single emerald pin into her hair. "That is all the crown they get." It wasn't modesty. It was message. Let the world ask, why no tiara? Why no orb? Let them squirm. Because power, she once told me, is more terrifying when it refuses to perform. The door creaked then. Count Orloff entered first, his jaw clenched, his uniform spotless. He looked at her, then at me, then at the painting. "Too much fire," he muttered. "Too little imagination," she answered. Behind him came the envoy from Vienna, a tall man with powdered lips and weak knees. He stared at the canvas too long. "This is how you wish to be remembered?" he asked. Catherine smiled, without teeth. "No," she said. "This is how I wish to be feared." They laughed nervously, but I watched Orloff. His gaze lingered not on the flames, not on the armor, but on the hands. The strong, elegant hands I had painted, clutching a scroll. A treaty? A threat? Only Catherine knew. And when she turned to him, still painted in fire, still dressed in silence, he lowered his eyes. Later, she dismissed them all. She sat beside me, barefoot now, her cloak puddled on the floor like blood cooling on marble. "Well?" she asked. I hesitated. She wasn't asking if the portrait was good. She was asking if I still saw her beneath it. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She leaned in then, her voice low, hot, almost cruel. Men think they can look through a woman's mask, that they can guess her motives, her secrets, her limits. She touched my wrist gently.
and yet every time I paint myself, they still gasp. She rose again, wrapping the cloak around her like a funeral veil. Send this portrait to Berlin, then another to the Senate, and another, yes, another, to the priest who called me Baron. I raised my brow. You want it everywhere? She turned back. No, I wanted haunting them. The door closed behind her, and I was left alone with the brush and the fire, wondering if the naked portrait had stripped her down to truth. Then this one had clothed her in revenge, and both were her.
He entered without knocking, a cardinal of the Orthodox Church wrapped in crimson and gold, carrying incense and ice beneath his eyes. He called her Empress. She called him Petya. No one else in the room breathed. I watched from the corner, as always. Paintbrush idle, heart loud. They had once shared a bed. Now they shared a war, not the kind with rifles, the kind with silence, letters, and veiled threats. Your portrait, he said, his voice soaked in sanctimony, has caused unrest. The bishops feel disturbed. Catherine didn't rise. She stayed sprawled across the chaise like a question no man could answer. You mean aroused, she said, sipping from a glass of dark Takagi. Let's be precise. He flinched. The robe could not hide the man beneath. She knew that too well. You sent copies to Rome, he hissed. To remind them, she said sweetly, that Peter's throne has options. He paced now, a lion in velvet slippers. You toy with holy things. She laughed, once, dry. I undress them. He stopped, turned. I remember when you still knelt to pray. She stood at that, not angry, not shaken, just tall. I still kneel, she said. Pause. But never to beg. I thought he would strike her. Instead, he stepped forward, reached for the chain at his neck, and pulled out not a crucifix, but a locket. Inside, a lock of hair, blonde, curled. Her breath caught, only slightly. You kept that? His voice broke for the first time. Some relics, he said. We never give to the church. It was not love in his voice. It was regret sharpened into politics. Why are you really here, Petya? She asked, softer now. He didn't answer at first. Then he produced a scroll, sealed, papal wax. A demand, he said, from Rome. They want the portrait destroyed, the artist silenced. My blood turned. Catherine didn't blink. And if I refuse? She asked. He looked straight at her now. They will name you Whore of the North. She smiled, slowly, like a knife being unsheathed. Let them. She stepped closer, so near I could smell rose and war on her skin. Let them build churches from my shame. Let them paint frescoes of my sins. She leaned in, just a breath from his lips, but tell them this. Her fingers reached under his robe, just at the waist, then stopped. Every time they speak my name, they feed my empire. He was trembling now, whether from rage or memory, I couldn't tell. She pulled away, dismissed him with a flick. Leave the scroll. He did, and the room grew cold. After he left, I approached. She didn't look at me. Instead, she said, "Paint me in white next." I hesitated. "White, my lady?" She finally turned. Her eyes gleamed. "Yes, white like a virgin bride." A pause. "But make sure the background is red." I understood. A symbol, a joke, a warning, and maybe, just maybe, a dare. She lay back again and whispered, as if to herself, "They call me whore,
yet come to confess.
It wasn't a brothel, not in the way most men understand it. No coin was exchanged, no names were asked, and yet power changed hands in every room. They called it the Veil, a place beneath the palace, carved into old stone, lit only by amber lamps and the sweat of secrets. I hadn't known Catherine kept a chamber like this, but she had summoned me there after the cardinal's departure. A masked woman met me at the stair, naked, except for a thin silver chain that wrapped thrice around her hips. "Follow," she said. I did. Down spiral stairs, through walls that hummed with candlelight. Each turn smelled of opium, honey, and ink. Women lounged on divans, draped in silence. Others leaned close to uniformed men, whispering names I wasn't meant to hear. But one thing was certain. These weren't whores. They were listeners. Spies. Eyes. "Who are they?" I whispered. The masked woman answered without turning. "The Empire's memory." At the lowest chamber, the floor dipped into a circle of cushions, and there she was, Catherine. Not in silk, but in plain black linen. No jewels, no throne, just a glass of water and a girl curled beside her, head in her lap like a kitten. "Painter," she greeted, voice low. I bowed instinctively, too deeply. "You summoned me, Majesty." She nodded toward the cushions. "Sit. You need to understand who protects your hand now." I sat. My heart beat like a drum in a tomb. The girl beside her looked up. No older than 16, maybe 17, eyes sharp, mouth silent. "This one," Catherine whispered, stroking the girl's hair, "served the Pope's legate for 2 years, dressed as a maid. He thought she couldn't read." She smiled, soft and cruel. She copied every letter he wrote, with a peach pit and candle ash. The girl blinked once, still wordless. "You see," she continued, "they think sex makes us weak." She leaned toward me. "It makes us invisible." I nodded, unsure if I should speak. But she went on. "The church wants you gone." "I know," I said quietly. Her gaze turned to steel. "Then understand this." She waved a hand, and one of the masked women stepped forward. A tray. On it, parchment, already yellowed. A list of names. I read. Cardinals. Ambassadors. A German prince I had once painted. "All of them," she said, "have visited the Veil." My stomach turned. "How many know?" She smirked. "Only the girls." I looked around. Some were painting their nails, others braiding each other's hair. None looked like threats, but they were. Living ledgers. "And if one of them talks," I asked. Catherine didn't answer. The girl beside her reached into a small velvet pouch, pulled out a silver tongue. Not a charm. A real one. Preserved. My blood froze. "She didn't talk," Catherine said gently. "We just couldn't risk it." The message was clear. Even here, loyalty had a price. She stood now, black linen flowing like ink in water. "You may paint the next portrait down here," she said. "In this room? In this truth." I swallowed hard. "And how should I portray you, Majesty?" She walked past me, up the stairs. Her voice echoed down. "With my mouth shut and my eyes open." Then she was gone, and I was left in the dark, surrounded by women who never spoke, but remembered everything.
They always called it the voliere. But no bird ever flew free from there, only sang or bled. I still remember the cold iron hinges as I followed Her Majesty down the winding corridor,
She moved like a silk ribbon through air heavy with incense. Her perfume, amber, musk, and something wild, seemed to thicken with each step toward that forgotten wing of the palace. It wasn't on any official plan. That was the point. The guards didn't follow. They never did when she took someone to the voliere. She held the key between her fingers like a claw. Not hidden, not flaunted, just shown. A warning and a promise. The cage wasn't golden, that would have been too kind. It was wrought iron tangled with vines that weren't real, but sharp all the same. Inside, the room was circular, no corners to hide in, and the walls whispered. Literally. Built in the time of Empress Anna, they said, a secret confession chamber for nobles who needed convincing. But Catherine had repurposed it. She always did, like old things remade in her image. The nobleman kneeling in the center wore the uniform of a Prussian envoy. His hat had been taken. His pride followed soon after. "You told Berlin I was unstable," she said softly, brushing her fingers along one of the iron bars. "Unfit, fragile, just a woman who got lucky with a coup." The man stammered something about reports, disinformation, duty, but she wasn't listening. She turned to me. "Sketch this." I hesitated, not because I was afraid I'd long stopped fearing her, but because there was something sacred about the way she handled power in that room. It felt ceremonial, like watching a god dress for war. She circled him slowly, asking nothing more. Silence broke people faster than whips. He cracked in under 7 minutes. "I was ordered to sow doubt," he cried, forehead pressed to the cold stone floor. "It wasn't personal." Catherine leaned in, her voice velvet daggered. "Oh, but I take everything personally." Then she kissed his forehead, a gesture that chilled me more than any scream, because that was her mercy. She let him leave, alive, marked. What he carried back to Prussia wasn't shame. It was terror wrapped in admiration, and it worked better than any treaty. Later that night, she asked me if I thought she was cruel. I told her no. "You're efficient." She laughed, genuinely. "You're the only man here not lying to me." I didn't tell her that I lied constantly, just not in words. Every portrait I painted made her more divine, more luminous, more untouchable. But the cage, that was the one place she showed her real face. Not monstrous, not mad. Strategic, patient. A lioness with a library of pain and a taste for control. She once told me, "Empires aren't built on love. They're built on fear properly applied." And she applied it like perfume. Subtle, seductive, suffocating. A few days later, the same envoy sent her a mechanical bird made of brass and jade, a Prussian clockwork marvel that sang when wound. She placed it on a velvet cushion inside the cage. She said, "I like to keep reminders of who tried to break me and failed." The voliere became more than a room after that. It was her confessional, her reliquary, her stage. One evening, she brought in a French diplomat who had been flirting too openly with one of her male courtiers. "France plays both sides," she murmured, walking behind him. "And both sexes. Admirable, but dangerous."
He claimed innocence. She let him sweat. "Tell me," she asked, running a fingernail along the iron, "when you kiss men, do you taste loyalty or lust?" He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. When he left, he no longer wore his powdered wig, nor his arrogance. The cage had that effect. She never used it twice on the same person. Once was enough. I sketched them all, never for public view. These weren't paintings. They were shadows on paper, truths that would never see sunlight. She kept them in a locked drawer. Told me, history is written in ink, but ruled by silence. And then one day she asked me if I wanted to see her in the cage. Not as a prisoner, as herself. She walked in barefoot, her silk robe open at the throat, crown abandoned. She sat in the center, knees drawn up, eyes closed. I didn't sketch. I watched. And in that moment I saw her most clearly. Not the Empress, not the beast, but the woman who built her own labyrinth of whispers and lived inside it because it was safer than love. When she opened her eyes, she smiled. "Now sketch, but make me beautiful." "You already are," she scoffed. Liar. But a useful one. And I drew, knowing that one day, long after the empire had changed hands and names and flags, someone might find this image. An empress in her cage. Not trapped, not trembling, but choosing it, because freedom was never what she wanted. She wanted control. And in that iron circle she had it, utterly. Even now, I sometimes hear her whisper through the charcoal strokes. Not my name. Just one word. Again.
The walls of the Winter Palace never slept. They breathed. They listened. And in those velvet-draped corridors, information moved faster than fire. Catherine didn't need armies to conquer men. She used lace. She used smiles. She used women like poison slipped into champagne. She once told me, late one night as I cleaned my brushes, "A lover moans for minutes. A spy moans for years." I asked if she meant herself. She just smiled, that cold, endless smile. It began, I think, with a woman named Magda, Polish-born, eyes like storm glass, voice like sugared smoke. To the court, she was Catherine's newest lady-in-waiting. To the real world, the one beneath the marble, she was the whisper that made kings tremble. Magda didn't just spy, she seduced information out of generals, priests, and even the stable master. She knew where the Cossacks were being bribed, which duke was hiding debt behind a false inheritance, whose son was sleeping with which violinist. And Magda fed it all back to Catherine, in low murmurs between silk sheets, or kneeling by her bath, as if delivering prayers. I once caught a glimpse of her reflection in a mirror while painting. She looked at Catherine the way wolves look at the moon, hungry, reverent, a little afraid. But Catherine, she never looked back. She never needed to, because she had other eyes. Ears, too. There was a mirror in her drawing room, oval, gold, and oddly placed. Venetian, she told guests, purely decorative. But behind it sat a boy, 16, mute, trained to memorize and report conversations in detail,
using only a wax slate. She never called him by name, only by color. Silver. What did the Duke of Corlin say today? He'd write, slowly, painstakingly. Then she'd burn the wax and smile. Good. Now let's see how he reacts when I mention his mistress's abortion. Yes, she was cruel, but her cruelty was precise, like a scalpel, not a club. It wasn't just nobles. Even servants were turned. One night she asked me, "Do you trust your valet?" I said, "Yes, of course. He'd dressed me for years." She chuckled. "I don't." And 2 days later, my valet vanished, replaced by a younger man with better posture and no scent. I never asked questions again. She once laid out the rules for me, drunk, bare-shouldered, wrapped in sable, holding a goblet of Hungarian red. There are only 3 kinds of people in my palace: those who watch, those who are watched, and those who think they're one when they're really the other. That night I couldn't sleep. I started checking the corners of my room for holes, covering mirrors with cloth, speaking less, writing more. Because if Catherine knew your secrets, she owned you. But if she guessed them, she toyed with you. And her games were never brief. The French ambassador once boasted he'd hidden his correspondence in a cipher no Russian could crack. So Catherine seduced his attaché instead. Not with sex, with books, with chess. She invited him for tea 3 afternoons in a row, praised his intellect, let him win a few matches, fed him strawberries dusted in rose sugar. By the 5th afternoon, the young man blushed when she entered. By the 7th, he wept into her lap and handed her the key to every French message sent east of the Elbe. She didn't even have to undress. That was the true seduction. Not flesh, not moans, power. I once asked her if she ever feared betrayal. She laughed. Betrayal isn't failure, it's fertilizer. I didn't understand, so she explained. When someone betrays you, they bloom. You see their colors. You learn how far they'll reach. Then you prune. And she did, often, mercilessly. There was a steward, Nikitin, who dared to sell state secrets to Vienna. Catherine found out within 48 hours. She didn't arrest him, no. She invited him to dinner, sat him beside her, fed him duck in honey and wine-soaked figs, then asked casually, between sips, "Do Austrian beds squeak as loudly as Russian ones?" He choked. She smiled. And he was gone before morning. No trial, no whisper. Just absence. Her spies made silence louder than death. And still, they adored her. Why? Because she didn't just rule through fear. She rewarded loyalty like a goddess bestowing grace. Magda was gifted land. The boy behind the mirror got an estate, and they said his tongue cut free. Even me, I was allowed to paint truths no one else could see. She let me into the quiet rooms, the side chambers where maps were drawn in candlelight, where inked fingers trembled over treaties, where men begged, not for mercy, but to be useful. She told me once in a whisper, low enough to disappear, spies are just lovers with sharper ears. And perhaps she was right, because in the end, love and surveillance are not so different. Both require attention. Both demand silence. Both punish secrets. And Catherine, she was the Empress of all 3.
They told me no one walked that hallway after dark. The eastern wing of the Winter Palace, sealed off by Catherine's orders after the death of her first lover, Sergei Saltykov. A part of the palace where light rarely touched, and where rumors, not servants, wandered free. But I was summoned there one night, not by voice, but by a folded note tucked into my sash after supper. No seal, no name, just 4 words scratched with a red-tinted quill. Bring paint, come alone. So I went, past the rooms of velvet, past the eyes of the guards who pretended not to see me, past portraits of dead czars that seemed to lean closer as I walked by. The floorboards groaned like animals kept too long in the dark. And then I saw her. The Empress. Not in her court robes, not even in silk. She wore nothing but a man's military coat, unbuttoned, and the expression of a lioness waiting for her prey to stop trembling. "You're late," she said. There was no canvas prepared, just the wall itself stained from old candle soot, cold as bone. She pressed her finger to it and looked over her shoulder at me. "Make this a room where secrets burn." I wanted to ask what she meant, but in Catherine's world, clarity was a luxury. She lay back against the stone bench, lit by only one flame. Her body pale and impossibly still, her eyes open like a queen who never blinked. And then she began to speak. Not to me, but to the room itself. "You think I became Empress by accident?" Her voice was low. "You think men handed me Russia like a rose? No, they gave me chains. I bent them into a crown." Her fingers dragged across her chest, slow, deliberate. "I bled to get here. For every stroke of red on your brush, there's a throat I slit with a smile." I had painted noble women gasping in passion, generals in triumphant poses, but nothing matched the violence of that confession, spoken as she bared her body like an altar of sin. Then she told me about Orlov, Alexei, the bear of a man who helped stage the coup, the one she called her sword. He was the father of her second son, and the hammer she used to crush Peter III. She didn't flinch when she said it. She smiled. "Power," she whispered, "tastes better with betrayal." I painted feverishly now, not her figure, but the shadow she cast. Arms spread across the wall like wings, legs parted slightly. A saint, a beast, a storm waiting to devour Russia itself. She asked me if I believed in heaven. I said no. She nodded. "Good, then you'll paint me as I am, not as they want me to be." That night, the room became more than stone and candle. It became a shrine. Not of religion, but of raw, unapologetic desire and rage. She told me the names of the ministers she had poisoned. She told me of the letters she forged, of the nights she spent whispering into the ears of men who thought they were seducing her, when in truth, she was unmaking them. One name echoed through the room louder than the rest: Nikita Panin. He had tried to control her court from the shadows. An advisor, yes, but more a spider in silks. She let him believe he pulled the strings, until she wrapped them around his throat. "I bedded his favorite nephew," she said, licking the wine from her thumb, "then sent him off to a post in Siberia." The boy cried. Panin begged. I laughed. I kept painting. By then, her coat had slipped. Her breasts glowed in the candle's light, not shy, not hidden, but as if even nakedness itself bowed to her. There was nothing soft about Catherine that night. She was carved of smoke and vengeance.
She told me to dip my fingers into the wine and smear it on the wall like blood. I did. Her laugh echoed, not girlish, not cruel, just unstoppable. That's what I remember most. That laugh. Even as I finished the mural, even as her body sank back into the shadows, that laugh lingered, like a secret I couldn't scrub from my ears. She stood finally, bare and gleaming. She walked over, pressed her palm to the painting's heart, the center of the swirling red, and whispered, "This is where it begins." I asked her what it was. She kissed me on the mouth, not with passion, but with ownership. Her tongue tasted of black cherries and war. She never answered. The next day, the hallway was sealed again, and no one ever spoke of that room. But I knew. I knew Catherine had begun something new in that shrine of shadows. Not just a game of power, but a ritual, a promise, a dark invitation to whatever came next. And I, poor painter that I was, had become her first priest.
I've heard it said that lovers leave traces. A scent on a pillow, a crease in a bedsheet, a sigh still hanging in the air. But Catherine, she left orders. The morning after our night in the eastern wing, I was summoned not to her chambers, but to the stables, a place I had rarely seen, much less entered. It was not the scent of hay that met me, nor horses. It was leather, warm, oiled, and something else, perfume but sharpened, spiced with something metallic, something old. They were waiting for me inside, two of her handlers, men with calm hands and blank eyes. They said nothing as they led me past the rows of stalls, toward a locked door at the far end. They didn't unlock it. They simply stepped aside. And that's when I saw it. The room was red, not painted, but draped. Velvet from ceiling to floor. No windows, only candlelight. And in the center, on a pedestal no larger than a footstool, was a collar. Not for a dog, not for a horse. It was too delicate, too cruel. Made of silver links woven into black leather with a single clasp shaped like a lion's mouth. And beside it, a note in her handwriting. For the one who sees too much, wear it and you'll see more. I don't know how long I stared. I should have run, should have laughed, should have pretended I misunderstood, but I didn't. I reached for the collar like a man reaching for a noose, slowly, trembling, but knowing it would fit. The moment the leather touched my throat, something shifted in the room, a soft creak behind the velvet. And then her voice. "Beautiful," Catherine whispered. "It suits you." She didn't step out from behind the curtains, not at first. Just her hand, pale and adorned with rubies, brushing the fabric as she moved, a shape in the shadows, a queen playing ghost. "Do you know what that collar once belonged to?" I shook my head. "Peter," she said. "Before he was Tsar, before he called me whore and usurper, he begged for my touch like a dog. I made him crawl for it. And then, when I grew bored, I took the collar off and never let him near me again." She appeared then, barefoot, draped in a robe of crimson fur with nothing beneath but her skin. "You wonder why I kept it?" She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the chain at my throat. "Because every man who wears it paints better." I should have spoken, should have questioned her, should have said no, but I didn't. Because the moment her fingers gripped the leash, I understood. This was not about shame. It was about clarity. That collar burned every lie from my tongue. It made me see not just her, but myself, stripped, trembling, willing. And Catherine, in her brilliance, her cruelty, her unbearable need to be seen, gave me only one command: watch. She walked to the center of the room, raised her arms, and the velvet behind her fell away like stage curtains. Behind it, 3 men bound at the wrists, blindfolded, kneeling in silence. I recognized them. Ministers, princes, one I think had once been married to her cousin. They were naked but for silk masks. They did not speak. They did not move.
"Do you think I rule them by decree?" she asked. "Do you think they sign my orders out of loyalty?" "No, I make them mine, here." She circled them, trailing her fingers along their shoulders. "They fear nothing in war, but here, in this room, they beg like boys." She looked at me then, with something between pity and hunger. "You think art is truth? No, art is obedience. The more a man bends, the more beauty he reveals." I painted them, all of them. Her body like flame in the middle of those trembling forms, her hand on one shoulder, her foot pressed to another's chest. Not cruel, not kind, just inevitable. And all the while the collar tightened, not physically, but in my mind. It held me in place. It forced my eyes to stay open. And Catherine, sweet Catherine, never once raised her voice. She only whispered. She whispered of wars she had not yet declared, of lovers she had not yet ruined, of a kingdom she planned to seduce, not rule. And I understood then, this was her true throne, not marble, not gold, but flesh, submission, performance, a stage of power where moans replaced proclamations and obedience replaced applause. When the night ended, she unhooked the collar herself. "I only let the ones I trust wear it," she said softly, brushing a kiss against my cheek, "even if they don't trust themselves." She left without another word, the room sealed behind her. And I stayed. Long after the candles died, long after the men were taken away like props, I sat on the velvet floor, fingers stained with crimson and gold, heart pounding with something deeper than lust, something holy almost. I had not just seen the Empress, I had worshipped her.
There's a sound the palace makes at night. It's not the wind, nor the crack of settling wood. It's softer than breath, sharper than memory. Like silk dragging across old stone, like a whisper too low to understand. I first noticed it the night after she took the collar away. My neck still bore the warmth of her fingers, and my eyes still painted her, even in the dark. I couldn't sleep. I wandered instead, barefoot, shirt half open, past portraits I myself had painted. Each one stared back at me. Each one looked wrong now. Too clean, too composed. They had no idea who she really was. But I did. And still, I wanted more. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Inside the walls. I froze. Listened. It came from behind the east wing tapestries, the ones older than Peter's reign, so dusty no servant dared touch them. But I knew that voice. Catherine. Not loud, not commanding, not even speaking to anyone. She was laughing. Low. Intimate, the kind of laugh a woman makes in the crook of a man's neck. I moved closer. Behind the tapestry I found the outline of a door, so well hidden it might have been forgotten if not for that sound. I pressed my ear against it. Her voice came clearer. "He thinks the collar means I trust him. How sweet." Then another voice, male, not one I recognized. "But you do trust him, don't you?" Silence. Then the rustle of silk, the clink of glass. "No," she said softly. "I simply like what he becomes when he's afraid." I backed away, fast, silent. The whisper vanished the moment I left the wall behind. That night, I did not paint. I watched. I watched every gesture she made in court, every hand she touched, every favor she granted, and slowly, I saw the web. She spun it like a widow spider, calmly, beautifully. Every man thought himself her only prey, but they were all dangling together. One thread tied to another. A general's kiss became a senator's death. A poet's sonnet meant an ambassador's disgrace. She stitched their fates together with such ease and still had room to smile at me. "Sleep well?" she asked at breakfast, without looking up from her boiled pears.
I always sleep well, I lied. She smiled wider. I hope the collar didn't bruise your ego. I said nothing. But I watched the way her fingers wrapped around the spoon. Delicate, intentional, as if stirring sugar into tea was a seduction. The man seated beside her, Count Alikov, didn't seem to notice. But I did. He laughed too loudly at her stories, touched her wrist when she mentioned Prussia, flushed when she praised his coat. That night, I waited again outside the wall. And again, I heard her voice. This time more urgent, more raw. You'll vote against the council's motion then? A pause. I don't know. I wasn't asking. A slap or a kiss? I couldn't tell. Then a whisper. I make kings of cowards, she said. And the man, whoever he was, moaned like a beast being broken. I shouldn't have listened. But how could I not? I was the only one allowed to see her naked and clothed, to know the body and the war. And yet, I had never been in that room. That secret room behind the wall. I began to paint differently after that. Not Catherine herself, but rooms, corridors, veils, keys, a gallery of absences. People said the portraits had changed. Darker, they murmured. Too empty. But Catherine, she noticed. You've heard the whisper, haven't you? She asked me one night. Her voice so close to my ear I thought I'd imagined it. What whisper? The one that tells you there's more. She moved behind me, hands resting on my shoulders. She built this palace like a puzzle, she said. Each man gets one piece, but only those who bleed for it see the whole. And what piece do I have? I asked, unable to breathe. She leaned down, her lips grazing the back of my neck. You're not a piece, you're the frame, she whispered. That night, she did not touch me. She did not kiss or undress. She simply led me, barefoot, past her guards, past her maids, into a corridor no one ever cleaned. There, she pulled a candle from the wall. The panel shifted, and the wall opened. Behind it, the stairs spiraled downward. She didn't descend. She looked at me, eyes glittering. She said, "You may go, but you can't return unchanged." I took the first step. The air grew colder with each turn. Stone, dust, and a sound. Not a whisper, a heartbeat. Mine? No. Something deeper. At the bottom, a chamber. Round, black, wet. Its only feature was a mirror. Tall, warped, framed in bone. I stood before it and saw myself, but older, worn, eyes hollowed by visions I had not yet painted, lips bitten, knees bruised, collar back around my neck, Catherine behind me in the reflection, though when I turned, she was not there. I climbed back up in silence. She was waiting at the top, calm as ever. "Well?" she asked. I saw. She kissed my forehead. "Then you're mine now."
After the mirror, I couldn't paint for 3 days. My hand wouldn't lift the brush. My eyes burned at the sight of canvas. The smell of oil and pigment made me gag. I thought I had lost the gift. But it wasn't loss. It was transformation. You see, once you've looked into that mirror, once you've seen what she lets you see, you no longer paint what is. You paint what hides. On the 4th day, she came to me. Not in court, not in her chamber, but in the studio, barefoot, wearing a silk robe that looked white until it moved. Then it shimmered red, like blood beneath ice. She didn't speak. She walked slowly, her eyes on mine the entire time, and sat across from the canvas I couldn't touch. Then she parted her robe, one shoulder at first, then both, until it slipped, silent, to the floor. She didn't pose, didn't ask what I wanted. She simply was. I picked up the brush, and for the first time since the chamber, my hand obeyed. But it didn't paint her face. It painted her scars. Yes, scars. Small ones. Fine. Hidden beneath collarbones, at the edge of her ribs, the inner curve of her thighs. I had seen her body dozens of times, but never truly seen this. And somehow, she let me. Let me map her pain like an empire. I wounded, I said softly. Her voice came back low. We all are. I painted them in red, not flesh. I made no attempt to hide them. When I finished, she walked to the canvas, still nude, and stared. She didn't say beautiful. She didn't say wrong. She only whispered, "Now you see why I need to win." And then she touched me. Not with hunger, not like the other nights, with reverence. She touched my cheek, my wrist, my paint-stained fingers. Then she knelt. Not as a woman begging, as an empress choosing. I want your truth, all of it, even when it burns me. I fell to my knees too. And for the first time in all those nights, she let me kiss her like a lover, not a subject. No commands, no performance. Just skin and breath, and the tremble of two people who had already seen each other's ghosts. We didn't sleep. We lay beneath the windows, watching the snow gather in silence. When morning came, she didn't rise for court. She told the steward to cancel her meetings. And the guards. She sent them away. All of them. For 2 days, it was only us. I cooked for her. Badly. She laughed with food in her mouth. I kissed crumbs off her lips. We spoke in whispers even when no one could hear us. I told her about my mother's death. She told me about her first time bleeding, how her father had handed her a dagger and said, "Now you can bear kings. Use it if one tries without your permission." I told her I used to dream of being a priest. She told me she used to dream of burning every church that wouldn't let her pray aloud. We were still naked when the knock came. 3 knocks. Slow, measured. We froze. She rose first, wrapped herself in a robe, opened the door. It was General Sokolov. His eyes flicked to me once. He didn't flinch, didn't smile. There's been a breach. Polish envoys intercepted a letter. They know about the mirror. Silence. Then Catherine's voice, sharp as flint. Who wrote it? Alikov. Of course. The fool from breakfast. The one who kissed her wrist when she praised his coat. I stood, but she held up one hand. Stay. Her eyes never left the general. Has he confessed? No, but he will. She didn't nod, didn't blink. She simply whispered, "Make him see the mirror." When the door shut, we were quiet again. Only now, the air had changed. The fire in her had returned, and this time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was part of it. Later that night, she stood before the same painting I had made of her scars. She traced one mark with her nail. He didn't see these. He only saw my crown. I walked behind her, placed my hands on her hips. "And I asked. She said, "You saw me before I even knew what I was." Then she turned and kissed me like it was the last breath before war.
The palace at night
is not silent. It breathes. Stone creaks, shadows stretch, and far below, something stirs, as if the very foundation remembers what it was built to hold. I took the long stairs down, past the wine cellars, past the old armory, past the locked iron gate where no servant dares to sweep. The third cellar. It should not exist. No maps mark it, no keys open it. Yet the door waited, ajar, when I arrived. Inside, only candlelight, rows of them, hundreds, melting into silver bowls shaped like open mouths. The air thick with smoke, salt, jasmine, and something older, something iron. And in the center, Catherine, barefoot, draped in crimson silk that clung like blood, one hand resting on the shoulder of a man I didn't recognize, naked, blindfolded, kneeling. When she turned to me, I forgot how to breathe. Her eyes glowed. Not metaphor, they glowed, like embers tucked into bone. She said, "You came." I nodded, because words no longer served. She beckoned me forward, and as I stepped closer, I noticed the others, figures behind the columns, watching, waiting. Some I knew, high-ranking courtiers, generals, a bishop, all silent, all still. Catherine stepped aside, revealing the floor behind her, a new circle drawn in crushed bone and wine, symbols I didn't recognize, yet understood. She placed a brush in my hand, one I hadn't brought. Its bristles glistened, slick and red. She whispered, "Paint him." The man knelt, obedient, chest rising, mouth open slightly, as if in prayer. I lowered myself, dipped the brush, and began. No canvas. His skin was the parchment. My strokes, automatic, like memory. Across his ribs, a sigil. Down his spine, words that pulsed as I wrote them. On his chest, the mark I bore myself, pressed now into his flesh by my trembling hand. When it was done, Catherine kissed his forehead and drew a blade. I wanted to look away, but she held my gaze, and in that gaze, I drowned. She didn't kill him, not exactly. What left his body that night was not blood alone. It was will, surrender. He collapsed like a stringless puppet, but he smiled as he fell. And then she turned to me. Not with cruelty, not with lust, but hunger. She said, "Tomorrow you paint me, but not as Empress, not as woman, as she who waits beyond the gate." I didn't know what she meant, but my skin already burned with need to obey. The brush slipped from my fingers. She caught it mid-air, tasted its tip, and then whispered, "So much prettier when you bleed for it." And I knew tomorrow there would be no returning.